Now we move on to the third panel, which is on the topic, the way ahead, India's options and responses. This panel would be chaired by Ms. Madhumita Raghuraman, Research Officer, Chennai Center for China Studies. Ms. Madhumita Raghuraman studied at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, and graduated with an MA in Development Studies with a minor in Economics. Her research for think tanks focuses on verticals related to development, like economics, health, and environment. So far, she has published 2 articles, one a book review on cybersecurity, and the other a report on the Chinese renaming of beds in the Indian Ocean region. The esteemed members of this panel bring a wealth of expertise and experience to the discussion. They are Major General Rajiv Narayanan, AVSM VSM, former Additional Director General of Military Operations, Army Headquarters, and former Defense Attaché, Embassy of India, Tajikistan. Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, President, Center for China Analysis and Strategy. Mr. Balasubrahmanyam C., Teaching Fellow and Chief Research Officer, School of International Cooperation, Security and Strategic Languages, Rashtriya Raksha University, who will be joining us virtually. And Commodore R.S. Vasan, Director General, Chennai Center for China Studies and Regional Director, National Maritime Foundation, Tamil Nadu. Now it is my pleasure to invite the chair for the panel, Ms. Madhumita Raghuraman, to deliver the chair's remarks and introduce the distinguished panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogesh. I'm Madhumita. Welcome to the panel, India's Options and Responses. So, gathering the thoughts from the last few days, the modernization of the PLA and its tactics, coupled with its geopolitical strategy, may actively subdue India's interests in security. So, India's response seems largely to be in 3 realms. One is its military response with respect to leveraging diplomatic relations. Second is in terms of networks and alliances in the Indo-Pacific. And third is in the economic dimensions. Coming to the military response, China's growing interest in India's neighbors and the Indian Ocean region calls for India to strengthen her ties with her neighbors and take on a more active role in the governance of both the Indo-Pacific and the Indian Ocean regions. Maintaining allies has taken off with initiatives like the Quad, the 2+2 ministerial dialogue, the coinage of the term the Indo-Pacific, and the US-Indian strategy in the region. The recent visit of the Honorable Prime Minister to the United States resulted in considerable military gains for India. So the next logical step is also to bolster its military and maritime relations and naval capacity, considering this is of most relevance to China. Other elements of India's military policy continue to be most active. India is engaged with a lot of tactical defense-related investments abroad, forming what is now known as the necklace of diamonds around China, in Singapore, Oman, Seychelles, Iran, and Indonesia. It's coined as a response to the threat which is commonly known as the string of pearls that postulates that China is encircling India through tactical investments. Historically, India has been very cautious in its approach to China and has tried to avoid a full-blown war. But recently, it has been taking measures to ramp up the infrastructure and security at the border. After Ladakh has become a union territory, the highway connectivity over there has improved greatly, giving us access to the region. And 400 out of around 626 vibrant villages are now located in Arunachal Pradesh, a critical region for the country. India has focused on its defense industry while leveraging strategic partnerships, whereas China attempts to expand its military and focus on technological innovation. China's stance on the border issue also seems only to be hardening. In the recent 19th round of military talks that took place on August 13th and 14th, China remained reticent on the issue of India resuming patrolling in older points. Although this was hailed as successful by some news outlets and in headlines, and although both countries have disengaged from both the sides, it remains that China has not agreed for India to resume patrolling in our traditional points in the Depsang Plains. So if this hardline stance continues, India may have to consider localized warfare, resuming patrolling on its own, or other ways to check China's reticence at the border. So at this juncture, it becomes relevant to introduce the alliances and networks that are on the rise in the Indo-Pacific region. In the face of China's aggression, India has formed several alliances, like the India-Australia-Japan alliance, the Australia-India-France trilateral, etc. Apart from major groupings that have already been mentioned, like the ASEAN, the Quad, the AUKUS, there has been emerging a sort of mini-lateralism in the last decade. This basically emerges as a way to fill the gap that is posed by major groupings like ASEAN and Asia Pacific Economic Corridor that work on a consensus based system. This basically means that often decision making processes are delayed because it works on a full consensus mode, and even joint statements that address basic concerns often may take time to come out. Rather, informal, flexible, target interest based groupings can tackle specific issues, and they have been on the rise, resulting in considerable and tangible gains for our country. This also comes at a time when the credibility of purely relying on a US led alliance system may come under question. And these informal groupings are often based on similar threat perceptions, as was already mentioned in previous presentations. In the next decade, India will have to balance the needs of both these kinds of small groupings and larger ones to maintain dominance in the region. Next, coming to the economic response. India's economic response and trajectory with relation to China has been largely framed in terms of economic decoupling in the public imagination. India's imports from China have doubled in 10 years, rising from around $50 billion in 2014 to have crossing 100 billion in 2022. There has been a slight decrease in trade between India and China in the first quarter of the year in 2023, and this trend has been mirrored by its other trading partners. Particularly, the US has experienced a decline by 12% with China. For India, decoupling may become a more coherent strategy in the future. This needs to be founded in a long-term push for the country to prioritize gaining economic benefits from trade, rather than oscillating between periods of intense boycotts, like after the Galwan Valley clash, and then later lapsing into business as usual. Decoupling from China proves not just to be costly, but will involve some degree of policy maneuvering. While our manufacturing competitiveness and the environment for manufacturing has very well improved in the last few years, some economists express the concern that it must not be offset by the possible collateral of intensified import of raw material electric parts from China, which constitutes one of our major imports. The declining renminbi also might exacerbate this issue. So, intensifying trade ties with countries that engage in more mutually beneficial trade practices, countries like Australia, for example, must become a priority for us. This is a better way of improving our own environment, our own employment rates, and it opens the possibility for more productive cooperation and on issues like development that China has historically been neglecting. Now, having touched on a few aspects of India's trajectory with China, I would like to introduce the expert panel that we have today. First, Major General Rajiv Narayanan, who during his storied service, Major commanded the oldest cavalry unit in India. He has served in both the western and northern borders for several years. The general also has many articles and published papers in Indian journals and magazines, and has presented his papers in several international seminars and webinars. He has edited and authored 4 books and a monograph. Mr. Jayadev Ranade is a member of the National Security Advisory Board and the president of the recently established Center for China Analysis and Strategy. A former additional secretary in the Cabinet Secretariat, Government of India, he is also a member of the core group of the ICWA and distinguished fellow at the ICPS, New Delhi. Commodore R.S. Vasan is an alumnus of the Defense Services Staff College, the Naval War College, and the International Visitor Leadership Program. He has a distinguished service of over 34 years in the Navy and the Coast Guard, and is presently the Director General of the Chennai Center for China Studies and the Regional Director of the National Maritime Foundation of Tamil Nadu. Balasubramaniam C. is a teaching fellow and chief research officer at the Rashtriya Raksha University, and before that he has worked at the Chennai Center for China Studies for several years, researching on a very varied set of topics on China. Thank you very much for being on this panel, all of you. Now over to Mr. Rajiv Narayanan sir for his address. Thank you very much.
Before I start, yesterday I had said we have a window of about a decade and a half. I thought somebody will question me on it. Nobody did, so I'll tell you why. What's my logic? The complete restructuring and reorganization of the PLA was done 2015-16. So think of an officer or a contract soldier who was joined in 2017. 18 years down the line, 15 years down the line, how well would he be trained in the current technology and how to use them? Maybe they are not ready today. Think deeper. And that is why I said you have 1 to 2 decades. This is the window you have. Because by then, like we always say and previous speakers have also said, never underestimate your enemy. So by then, these people who have come in new, maybe the present lot may find it difficult to absorb the technology, but these new people who are coming in will absorb the technology. How well they fight, that's a different issue. Absorption of technology is important. And that was the reason why I said 1 to 2 decades. So, you got to keep your guard up all along the LAC. Because I had mentioned that when somebody gets cornered, he'll hit out. And you are one of the options. Apart from Taiwan and South China Sea, you are one of the options. So you got to keep your guard up. It's not just along the LAC, along also the line of control. Because speaker after speaker said Pakistan is its cat's paw. Your maritime and your aerospace borders. And you got to prepare to counter grey zone threats from both fronts. You got to understand that he is shifted in 2013 from Mao's active defense to now what they call active forward edge defense or forward defense. In the Science of Military Technology of 2013, cleared by the Academy of Military Sciences, active forward edge defense or active forward defense means expanding your strategic space so that you fight well beyond your land, maritime and aerospace borders. So please remember that. So what I had yesterday said about multi-domain challenges, this is the kind of multi-domain challenge you're going to face. And prime amongst them comes the 3 warfare strategy: legal, psychological, public opinion, subversion. We had a healthy chat about the media subversion here some time ago. Information warfare, we had a chat about that also. Cyber, digital, space, cartographic, cultural, disruptive technology and grey zone warfare, cartographic warfare. Like when he publishes his map as far back as 2006, he's shown Arunachal as part of his territory. And if you go on to his website of where they make their dams, the water ministry, you will find dams even in what he calls South Arunachal, if you please. So support to terrorists we know, northeast, and of course he will assist Pakistan to support whatever he can do in India. His main aim is, because now the relocation is starting. So decoupling became a very aggressive word, so new phrases were coined: de-risking, friend-shoring, near-shoring, all that is decoupling. But he has to make sure that you are looked down as not the country where the supply chain can come, because that is the only way he is going to curb your rise. So what are the external challenges? We have gone through all of them. Note the third one, most important. Anti-India narrative we discussed within India. Please remember, he is doing it outside India also to put your influence down. 3 warfare strategy abroad against you. Whether it be in your neighborhood, your extended neighborhood, globally, anywhere, he will actively do that. Okay. Rest is self-explanatory. Okay, how do you tame the dragon? These are radical views that I have. So this is the main thrust of what I want to present today. You have governance structures to cater for the 20th century. You are now moved into the 21st century with its own multi-domain threats. You never faced this kind of threats so much in the 20th century as you are facing today. Are those structures strong enough to counter it? Because a multi-domain threat has a response required from multiple departments of the government. But it has to be coordinated properly. So who's going to do it? So that is where the first that I have recommended is your cabinet. You already have a cabinet secretariat. Expand that with the necessary experts who can guide the cabinet secretary on the internal and external threats that are emerging, evolving. You need that. So the CDS should be part of the cabinet secretariat. They used to be sitting there separately till the 50s as the commander-in-chief and the cabinet secretariat till the commander-in-chief appointment was removed. I'm saying put the CDS as part of this cabinet secretary. Maybe if required DGNIA. I'm not talking of R&AW, they are already part of it. So if you have a DGNIA and all these structures together, they'll be able to guide the cabinet secretary and be able to coordinate everything, orchestrate your response to the multi-domain threat. Your NSCS and NSA, they are at the moment functioning based on an administrative order of the government. I would recommend get in a parliamentary act. And it is the NSCS and the NSA with the requisite experts in there who should formulate your national security strategy. Please remember, security is not just military or men in uniform. It has multiple domains: your food security, education security, economic security, energy security, resource security, data security, cyber security, and I can go on. So that should be your national security strategy, and based on that, they should lay down your national defense strategy. How you will defend yourself, internal threats and external threats. That is, next I would say expand the Niti Aayog and make it responsible for making your draft policies for every department and have the necessary experts to guide them through the problems that they would face in execution of those policies and what kind of external threats you will have in executing those policies. If I am going to put you could say a topic expert to sit there for the policy, he doesn't know about execution. He doesn't understand the pitfalls in executing it. So you need people from the governance to be sitting there to guide them that, okay, if you do this or if you reframe this, it is easier to execute. And concurrently, you need the internal and external security experts to tell that in the multi-domain threat, what are the kind of threats that you can get in executing that policy and how can you defend yourself from it. Now the national security strategy becomes the capstone document actually for all your policies, and your national defense strategy becomes the capstone document for your internal and integrated internal and external security strategies. Yeah, just 2 minutes. You have to of course ensure your Atmanirbhar Bharat, but that doesn't happen. You need to make sure that you have to revamp all your policies in tune with that. We heard some of the entrepreneurs telling us the problems that they face if you're going towards Atmanirbharta. So you need to listen to them and revamp those. You need to enhance, of course, and all your strategies and policies has to ensure all these securities. Okay. Of course, military reforms, this has always been my pet thing. You have to start with a strategy. You just don't do reform for reform's sake. There has to be a strategy, then identify what capabilities you need, which will dictate to you the structure to effectively utilize those capabilities. So structure is number 3. So I hear all the talk on the newspaper, they are making this integrated front, this front, that front. I worry about the first part. So this, and from these flow your individual service strategies, procurement priorities, and there is a need to revamp your CAPF because those are on the borders. Border guarding has two aspects: border policing and border defense, and both are as different as chalk from cheese. So those that have been allocated in the Union War Book that they will be part of border defense, please place them under the control, operational control of the Ministry of Defense. They will structure and equip them as required. I can't have a police force coming in suddenly for defense because he is not structured or trained for it. Adequacy of budget support, we can take it up in the discussion. In this, only one point I have: CapEx is the biggest problem. Where it lies, we can take it in the Q&A. I am recommending the RBI should have, it should not, what lapse should not go into the consolidated fund of India. No. What lapses should go into the RBI CapEx fund. It will generate money, and over a period of time you will find it will be able to complement your budget, and you may reduce the CapEx expenditure. So this is the last point I had. This is the time for you to rise and reinvigorate. We can talk, but unless you walk the talk, nothing will happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Major General. Your points about the military reform were really nuanced and shed a light on this topic that not a lot of us have access to. Thank you very much. Following this theme, if I could ask Mr. Jayadev Ranade to make his presentation. Thank you.
A challenging subject, I would say. The way ahead, India's options and responses. But let me first open, Comrade Vasan, by saying that I anticipated you and published a book last year called The Strategic Challenges India 2035, where I spelt out what are the challenges that India faces. And these are not just military. These are across multiple domains that we face. Something I have maintained for many years, when a number of people disagreed vehemently, was that our main threat and an enduring threat is China. But we looked at Pakistan, we looked at some other countries, and we tailored our military capabilities to tackle those threats, which are actually nothing. But China is our biggest threat. And as I said yesterday, the world is changing, and that has added to our threat perceptions. So let me just identify a few. The first, with China having become so strong, and China now adopting an inimical stance towards us, which is opposing us everywhere, it's trying to create vulnerabilities and exploit those that exist. We are also worried about the changing dynamics that are taking place with Russia. Russia becoming more dependent on China. And if that crosses a certain threshold, then it is a source of serious worry to us. So that's very much a challenge. We are trying to balance it. We are trying to keep Russia somewhat happy. But in my personal opinion, it's a matter of time before Russia becomes inordinately dependent on the Chinese. And rest assured, when that stage comes, Beijing will tell Russia what it should do and what it should not do vis-a-vis us. So that's a challenge that we have to face. The other challenges are centered on China. What happens between the Chinese and the United States? How sharply will that contest sort of lead to tensions? I do think that they are headed to that. Maybe in the next 2, 3, maximum 5 years, we will see something happening, one way or the other. And that will again be a time where we will have to face and tackle a challenge. And the challenge will be, whose side are we going to be on? Because to my mind, the Americans are going to make it very clear to us that you have to choose a side. If it's a maritime conflict, then what are we going to do? How are we going to assist them if that's their demand? Or are we going to steer clear? In which case, what are the losses that we are going to face? So these are challenges that we have. Since you asked for a response, since you asked for a way out, I would suggest that what we need as a country is an intensive inflow of capital investment. We need the latest advanced technologies which we can capitalize on, and we need diplomatic heft. The only country that can provide all three is the United States. We don't have to, I'm not advocating that we put our ships on the front line, but certainly we have already signed a number of agreements with the United States to provide them refueling, revictualling, etc. on our bases. Those are available. We are developing the Andamans. That should be made available to them, and that will be a choke point as far as the Chinese are concerned. So it works in our interest. So I'm just flagging the various challenges that are confronting us and the days to come. But the critical, I would say, are our own internal challenges. So let me first touch on the army, since there are representatives of the armed forces here. We have a situation on the front today, on the land border. We have almost 70,000 Chinese and Indian troops facing each other. Unprecedented. The Chinese are digging in. Whatever talks may be going on between the border commanders, etc., but the Chinese are digging in. They're building new roads, they're building new railways, they're building multiple airports. They're digging in other words. So, one question I'll just throw without taking a call on it: is it still an intrusion or has it become an occupation? Something we got to think about. It's over 3 years. And they are showing no signs of going back. So whatever we read, that I think you mentioned, that some of the news outlets are taking, a very positive line on this thing. Well, I wonder why they're taking that line. And I'm sure they're all looking to a great meeting between Modi and Xi at the BRICS, things like this. But the facts, belie that. There's no breakthrough happening except on the Chinese terms. That's one thing we have to look at. And as I have told your friends in Delhi, in the South Block, there are points where we are vulnerable. There's no doubt about it. They've got better logistics, their terrain is better. But there are also points where we have an advantage. So why don't we capitalize on those and adopt a policy where when the Chinese do something, wherever it may be, we respond in 24 to 48 hours and indicate to them that we're not any longer going to take it lying down. It's all right that we massed our troops. That was very good job. We moved very fast. We blocked them. But the fact is they're there. They're denying us access in a number of areas. And I think it's time, frankly, to call the Chinese bluff. Many of our colleagues say that, well, the Chinese are very powerful. They can do this to us. They can do that to us. Our economy can't take it, etc. But I think there comes a time when we need to do it. And you might be surprised. Some of the speakers here today have said, don't overestimate the Chinese. I think both of you said it. Well, this is one way of really testing them. Can they do it? The Vietnamese did it. The Israelis have done it with the others. Why not us? Finally, as I said, it's internal, and I'm going to be a bit out of the box on this. I think our bureaucracy is holding us back. We heard various speakers talking about angel tax, talking about our funding for defense or whatever. Why can't we speed up things? Why does it take so long? And I'll give you one example. If you recall, some years ago, the Americans offered us co-development and co-production of aircraft carriers and of jet engines. And I happened to meet the late Mr. Parikar, Defense Minister, at a private dinner. There were just 3 people there. And I was talking to him and I said, what are you doing on this? These are, bonanzas for us if it comes through. And I'm quoting him. He said, Ranade साहब क्या बताऊं? वो फाइल मेरे पास आज आई है सेक्रेटरी साहब के साथ, सेक्रेटरी साहब से. 1 year after that. I said, why? What happened? He said, मुझे क्या पता? 1 साल लगा है. That is the pace that at which we work. And the Chinese are building 1 frigate in 3 months. So we have a lot to look at inside, but I would say that the challenges are there. We have begun moving in a right direction. I think the abolition of 370 was a brilliant move, because for the first time we made it clear that J&K is not negotiable, it's ours. We are not going to talk about it. So things like that, we have taken a firm stand. We are moving in that direction, but there's a lot more to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jayadev Ranade. That was wonderful. You particularly pointing to the bureaucracy and how it's holding us back. That was excellent. Sir, if I can invite Commodore Vasan to speak, following both the previous presentations about the key reforms we could make in the Navy and our friends and foes in the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu, and good afternoon again. My job has been made simpler. I can say that because, you already drew up the entire canvas, and we had distinguished speakers like General Rajiv Narayanan and Mr. Jayadev Ranade, who is an authority, telling us what to do. The challenges, by and large, have already been identified. And what's come out starkly is the economic difference, the economic differential, which people keep talking about. What is the heft that you have with $3.25 trillion compared to China, which has 19, and 23, which is USA has got? Those figures came out clearly. So obviously you have to follow a path which will shore up your economy. It's not going to happen overnight. These are harsh realities of life. You have to acknowledge this and work to a plan where you have a stable environment. And the stable environment, you should be able to control it. And it cannot be dependent on what China does or what China does not do. Then you are already not playing ball. You already surrendered. So therefore, I think you have a trajectory of great importance in the next 10 years. I'll borrow from General Rajiv Narayan on this window of 1 decade. It's important to know what is the time frame that you have and what is it that you can work for. So let me start from the top. We need to build a comprehensive national power. How did you find comprehensive national power? The people, the resources, the skill, the technology that goes with it, the agriculture, whatever you want to say. All this come under comprehensive national. There are strengths, there are weaknesses. And I would again go along with General Shankar, who clearly said, you only don't keep on looking at your weaknesses, start looking at your strengths. You need to be able to play to your strengths. So from there, when you move down to the maritime dimension, because time is short, I will not look at other things which are already covered by the distinguished speakers. Let me look at the maritime domain. India has always been a maritime nation, the factor that people forget. Look at the Chola Empire. They went beyond Andaman Nicobar. The empires which are all there, which Professor Suryanarayan will tell you, he's been an expert of South and Southeast Asian studies, we expanded our maritime empire well beyond Andaman Nicobar. The Cholas. It was similarly on the west coast, as Shivaji. The fort network that he built out there, where did he lose it out? Everybody blames the Mughals for that. That's okay. You can blame, you have to find somebody to blame. How did the Britishers come here? They came through the seas. And it is trade that they brought him here. How? Flag follows trade, the great philosophy. So they came through the trade routes and they established the flag here. So we need to now look at from comprehensive national power, which is a huge subject. I'll only come down to the comprehensive maritime power, because that's my focus. Maritime power or comprehensive maritime power is not just the Indian Navy. It is not the Indian Coast Guard. It is not the Coastal Security Group. So what is it? Therefore, we need to have a vibrant kind of a maritime structure that shores up our entire maritime capability. Shipbuilding. It's pointless saying, we had our shipbuilding capacity in so-and-so century and we had the largest thing in Lothal, etc. But all this is history. Are you going to live on the past laurels or are you going to do something about it? Even today, when you look at the ships, 95% of them are run by the Chinese. What is your shipbuilding and ship repair capability? You need to be able to do something about it. I'll just flag some of this. We can take up this later in the discussion. Everybody is talking about SDG and blue economy. What are you doing about blue economy? Tourism. Yeah, a small island in Thailand draws so much of tourists. A huge beach here, the marina, you see the number of tourists who come there. So what are we doing to capitalize on already what we possess? You don't have to look for new things. So if you look at the 6 components of blue economy, which is tourism, which is ship building, fisheries, connectivity and infrastructure, port development, etc., you find that we, for 30 years we've been talking about 13 major ports. Are you happy? What are the number of deep ports that you have? No, you still have to transship from Sri Lanka or from Singapore. Now we are talking about Kolachal, it becomes political democracy, okay? The perils of democracy, but the point is that unless the nation has a master plan for shoring up its maritime potential and capability, you will not be a maritime power. If you are not a maritime power, you cannot be a global power. Let's get this straight. So, I think these are some of the factors that you need to remember as we are trying to embark on this journey of taking India to the next level. Okay, so specifically in terms of Navy, I would say, having been in the Navy for 34 years and seen this trajectory, they're doing a great job. When people are still not talking about Atmanirbharata, we had the first Nilgiri class which came out in 1972. That's how many years ago? 60 years ago or 50 years ago. So, by and large, the Navy has done well. This morning I mentioned the name of Admiral Mickey Roy. He was the one who used to be credited for getting your sea-based deterrence going. The project ATV, which was secret for a long time. Then thereafter, we had the nuclear submarines which have come out, which has given you that potential for second strike capability. It didn't come overnight. We worked for 30 years. We worked with Russians, we worked with L&T, we worked with various other people, our own DRDO, our own Mr. L.V. Krishnan is here. He will tell you about the kind of trials that were done for a 93 megawatt reactor ashore. So, this is the way you have built national systems. Again, I would like to draw your attention to what Mr. Jayadeva Ranade said. He said, China is number one threat. I used to interact with Georgie Fernandez on many occasions. I was the Coast Guard commander. He used to come here regularly. Why he came was, of course, to go and see Vaiko. There's a different issue. So, but every time when I met him, this is one point he said. And he also publicly said, it's not that only privately he was telling me. China is your number one enemy. He did not even use the word adversary. Let's get this straight. That means, at that time, the political level, it was very clear as to, who are the people who are likely to subvert your own journey. It has happened through the United Nations Security Council. It's happened through the string of pearls. It has happened through the engagement with Pakistan, the support nuclear supplies to Pakistan, to Sri Lanka, where they've taken over Hambantota. So everywhere they have been coming in the way of your progress. So who is your enemy? Of course, there are internal enemies. I'm not talking about, that's another session seminar. So, coming back to the naval point, the point is you have enough submarines, but your indigenization process, we in the Navy, when we are sitting here, you will know that, there are 3 things that we look at. One is the propulsion. We are quite good. Okay. The other is the platform capability for staying. That's also okay. But it's weapons and sensors which take up major portion. Something like 40, 50, 60%. So unless you are in a position to make your own weapons and sensor systems, you are not an indigenous Navy. So, this is where we need to be a little more careful in what we do. Just give me a minute. I just wanted to see. I sat down and I wrote some points. I want to know if it's around. Yeah, it's here. It's in my pocket. I just want to see if I have forgotten something very important. Give me 30 seconds. Okay, we are doing well in terms of, building out resources, abilities. Like Indonesia is offering a deep water port. A submarine can sit alongside there at 40 meters depth and fire their missiles. So this is progressive thinking. So what China is trying to do to you, you're already trying to do to them. So remember that. ASEAN is central to Indo-Pacific. We are already engaging with them. As I brought out in the morning, the very first ASEAN-India exercise, naval exercise was conducted. We have to continue to nurture them. Out of these many things, something like 5 to 6 of these ASEAN countries have already shown their interest to be part of India's initiatives, right? And then, we did talk about Sagar, maritime neighborhood first, and other conceptual issues. Due to time, I will not talk about it. But point is that geographically, you are a blessed country. Let's not forget it. Let's use this geography. Andaman Nicobar, don't keep on saying I have 592 islands. how many of them are available for you to use? There's always an environmental lobby says, no, we don't want to do this. But today, luckily, at least in southern Andaman, we are looking at another port which is going to come up, a deep water port. There will always be development, and progress always clashes with environmental concerns, but one has to take a balance. So let's develop Andaman Nicobar. It should be a top priority. It's already being done, because that's your fortress which will prevent China from coming anywhere into the Indian Ocean region. They can't cross Andaman Nicobar. And luckily for us, we have a tri-services operational command even before you started thinking of theatre commands. So let's capitalize on what we already have, improve on what we have. Let's work on comprehensive maritime power, which will make and contribute towards making a comprehensive national power. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. That was very well said. Especially taking the theme of playing to our strengths, I would like to invite Mr. Balasubramaniam to talk about the economic angle of the Indian response to China. Sir, how do you feel that India can play to our strengths economically? China is particularly well known for, in terms of its imports and trade with India, always leveraging a sort of power and not importing what India is actually really well known for, and placing tariff barriers on Indian pharma and things that we are really good at. So if I could invite Mr. Balasubramaniam to talk about how can we play to our strengths.
Thank you. Thank you, Madhumita. Just to, since I'm using my...
Excuse me, sir, just a minute. I'm sorry.
It is mentioned here, projected on the screen. India's GDP is $3.2 trillion. China is 19. India's actual GDP now is about 3.8 of $3.9 trillion. That's a part. On purchasing power parity terms, the World Bank has estimated India's GDP as $13 trillion. China is at 33. So when you project it in this manner, you see a 6 times difference between China and India. But when you project it on a PPP terms, India and China is only 2.5 times difference. Apart from that, I have been contesting the figure of $3.9 trillion. I have always had the view India has already crossed $4.5 trillion in GDP. Because only 4 days ago, there was a petition filed before the RTA Chief Commissioner. You please give us the report of the National Council of Applied Economic Research and Institute of Financial Research and Policy, which Mr. Pranab Mukherjee commissioned to estimate what is the amount of black money and what is the extent of income that is suppressed in India. According to my information, those reports contain identical figures. 75% is suppressed. So the government refused to give this report to the parliament. Government refused to give this report to anybody else because there are huge policy implications on this.
Bala sir, we can proceed with your presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhumita, for setting the tone for the discussion. I also thank Shivaraman sir. It's always insightful to hear to Shivaraman sir. My apologies for switching off my camera since I'm at home and using my mobile internet just to conserve my bandwidth. I have just switched off my camera. So before I start, I would like to, as a part of India's responses and way ahead, as a researcher, you need to give an objective and dispassionate analysis. So in that way, I would say I would neither overestimate the Chinese nor at the same time I would underestimate the Chinese, because I'll tell you why in the subsequent few points which I'm going to flag now. Today you're dealing with a northern neighbor who has a plethora of initiatives, a global initiative like the One Belt and One Road, which was extended to other domains like the maritime Silk Route, the digital Silk Route, the health Silk Route, and space Silk Route, which extends from India's neighborhood, Central Asian republics, from Europe to South America. And also, as a part of reinventing itself, we are in an era where it has given out a triad of initiatives, starting from the GDI, the Global Development Initiative, Global Security, and the recent one being the Global Civilizational Initiative. So you're dealing with a country which envisions by 2049 to replace the US and stands, to become a global leader in terms of national strength and international influence. And of course, they also want today. They're also speaking about by 2035 they want to be a leader in a global leader in innovation and become a leader in next generation of technology. So let us understand what has been the kind of the impact that they have left and what should India do. Because as a first part of suggesting solution, you should also understand what they have been doing. So as we all know, in terms of South Asia, they have been conducting all their ties in terms of bilateral and plurilateral meetings, including using cultural diplomacy, starting from Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka. Classically, in the case of ASEAN, China has used the playbook of using trade dependency and of course pitting one against the other, which we can classically call the playing the differences card, in creating to ensuring that ASEAN doesn't stand united. And of course, in terms of Central Asia, which is absolutely the Russia's backyard, they have created various template. One popular being the C+5, which is a China plus 5 Central Asian republics. Whether today you like it or not, especially after the Ukraine's war, Russia is now forced to play a second fiddle to the Chinese. And it's very interesting developments that has been happening even in the case of West Asia, where we see a lot of increased interaction. And before China could mediate, they put out what they call the 5-point security proposal. And of course, after the trade and technology war which China has with the US, it has now turned to Europe also in terms of whether to in terms of acquiring of technology or be investments in port or excess production. So there was a point which was made by my preceding distinguished panelist who mentioned about sustainable development goals and blue economy. Let us understand today, whether we like it or not, China directly heads 4 of the 15 principal agencies of the United Nations, which is the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, UNIDO, ITU, and ICAO. And apart from the 15 international agencies like World Bank and International Fund, IFAD, 9 out of the 15 are controlled by Chinese deputies. So especially when we speak of SDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals and blue economy, the UN has its own think tank of sorts, which is called the UN DESA, which is the UN Department of Economic Social Affairs. Again, this is headed by a Chinese, which is the present one being the Li Junhua, who's heading it. So understanding these and taking note of all these aspects, I can suggest a few policy options for India. One could be taking note of the group of countries that China is dealing with and take measures. When I say measures, what I mean is to be very proactive and to increase interactions with those countries. Next would be to assess and keep a close watch on the kind of global footprint that China has been doing in terms of acquisitions and take countermeasures. The recent one, I think in UK, there was a semiconductor company which China was planning to take over, which it came under the scanner of MFI, and a lot of discussion was going on these ones. So this is what I meant by, keeping a tab on China's global footprint, not only in technology companies, but apart from other companies. And also, we have to take a very active role in terms of setting standards and play an even more active role at the UN level. And speaking of economy, I think we have to still our budgetary allocations towards R&D is not so. I think somewhere it comes around 1% or less than 1%. So idea is to increase the investment in R&D setup, because innovation is the key. And we should also increase the risk-taking ability of our businesses. And also one objective would be to take a very long-term view, so that there is no myopism or knee-jerk reactions. Rather take a careful, calibrated stand on issues and focus more on narrative building and strategic communication. This is one aspect I think we still have a lot more to do. And overall, as an emerging power in the global stage, India must aim to be a proactive rule maker, but neither not be a defensive rule taker. So I stop here, and I look forward to further discussions.
I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers very much for your valuable contributions and keeping to the time. I think that brings me to the end. Are there any questions?
See, I have 2 points. One is very valid suggestions were given by the speakers on the way ahead. But, come to think of it practically, the governments that occupy the place in Delhi always look at it from the next election point of view. So unfortunately, we do not have a continuity in our policies, which is a major impediment. unless we have a long-term vision, which I probably would call it as a grand strategy, as what India would like to be in 2040 or 2050. And accordingly, governments work towards achieving that aim, notwithstanding political, views or political standing or vote bank based politics. That's number one. Second, what I would like to mention is that India is probably geographically the best located today in the world as far as maritime, dimension is concerned. Yet we do not have a single transshipment hub port. We rely on the ports at Jebel Ali, in Colombo, and in Singapore. And we have the feeder vessels bringing cargo to Indian coasts. We developed the Vallarpadam port, which was a failure. Now we are going into another failure, Vizhinjam, the port which is coming up in Kerala. Can you imagine a ship diverting from the ocean passage, expending 8 hours of fuel? Fuel is the main factor which determines shipping. 8 hours to divert from the ocean passage to call on Vizhinjam. They will rather prefer to go to Colombo and discharge the cargo there, unless and until Vizhinjam is able to have the best management policies and most cost-effective turnaround. Again, now we're looking at the next port, as Commodore Vasan mentioned, about the Andaman Car Nicobar Islands. Here again, I have a different view. You have the transshipment port at Colombo, then you have the port at Singapore, Kelang, all these ports are there. How are you going to develop a port without a rail connectivity, with less air connectivity, and with very low number of feeder vessels? And how are you going to match the competence displayed in Singapore, Colombo, or in Kelang? So these are commercial and operational issues which are to be factored. It is just not just look at a map and say, I'm going to have a feeder port here and work towards it. That's wrong. A lot of thinking has to go into these things. Niti Aayog cannot decide tomorrow that Car Nicobar is best placed and have a project manager to make a report which is in favor of that policy and say, go ahead. A lot of due diligence is required in these issues. You need to have professionals working on it. So, sorry, I've got a bit overcharged, but these are facts of ground. It might look very good for the public to see in the papers, oh, another transshipment port coming up in Car Nicobar, or Vizhinjam, Adani Group is bringing in a big way. I'm sorry, I don't, I would like to see how the port is going to function. And a lot depends upon the connectivity of the port. Vizhinjam is slightly better off. But just imagine the case of Car Nicobar. There are two submissions. You may draw your own conclusions. Thank you.
That was the reason I said you need to have some executive experts sitting in Niti Aayog to tell them and guide them that if you're making a policy, what are the pitfalls in executing it.
Venu, I go along with your the line of thinking, particularly related to connectivity. If you do not even have rail and road connectivity, what are you going to do by transshipping? If you are going to look for another feeder ship to bring it here, it's a very valid point. I'm not sure how many of these have been looked at and what deeper strategic objectives are there. Not just military, not just economic, it's also a military objective which is there, both containing China and that. So that point of view, it may not be in the public domain. There's only a kind of a case which is a fair point. On the other point about each party coming there working towards election, Navy is in a very good place. I'll tell you why. We have long gestation periods, and therefore if somebody has already placed order for 5 supply ships which are not been ordered, nobody will cancel them because it will continue irrespective of which party comes to power. This will continue because of the long gestation that we have in terms of realizing our maritime and naval potentials. Just I thought briefly talk to you. Yeah, okay.
Just not a question, but just two quick comments I just thought. One is heading itself, like when you talk of options and responses, options can be decided based on policies. Option 1, 2, 3, 4, you can work it out during peacetime. But responses will be based on an event. And like we have all discussed during the past couple of days, the threat is going to be non-military more. So how do you know there is a threat existing today? In fact, I'm grateful to General Narayanan for making that first point, because my thesis was on this, that when you're having non-traditional threat, like in the defense services, we have war games every year. We know how to change, or what is the change that has happened, how to, if he comes to this line, how to respond, the next line, how to respond. So how are we discerning the threat today? Are we under attack today from multiple domains? Like, is it different ministries are involved? If there is a cyber attack today, I'm not a child, I'm going to, he slapped me, I slap him, I should not be doing that. So if there is a cyber attack today, I may respond with an economic response subsequently. But that economic response will have, like in artillery, what we call a cross-term effect. One factor of a temperature and a pressure being affected, when you fire a shell. So similarly, when you decide to take an economic response, it will have effect across multiple domains. So even I feel there has to be some outsourcing done to think tanks like this, where you have multiple people sitting, wargame it for the government, present it to the CCS maybe on an annual basis or a biannual basis, so that the responses are more measured, they know what are the implications, and like Commodore Venu said, then these are non-political, they are government proof, they are sealed and available as to what are the responses, and of course the review is needed because the international scenario keeps changing. So, but there has to be someone doing the thinking, because the CCS doesn't have the time, and at least they should be aware as to how to respond. Thank you.
I have been through 3 governments as secretary, Government of India. It's very little any government that succeeds another government can do by way of major change in policy. Now, for example, in the present government, they have done many things, but the seeds were there. This government has gone ahead and implemented many of the things, like for example, Jal Dhan Yojana or all these things. Similarly, in regard to indigenization of weapon systems, etc. There is, in a democratic government, it's very difficult to change policies overnight. Now, for example, as regards foreign policy, because I was very closely associated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs during my previous tenure there, yes, there may be some changes here and there, but there cannot be any wholesale change. If there is a wholesale change, the government will come into serious problems. So that is why there is a continuity of bureaucracy. Somebody said bureaucratic hurdles are there. Yes, I do agree, a lot of bureaucratic hurdles are there. A lot of decision making takes place after considerable delay. But all these delays are there because of some fear that a new government may come and may start changing the whole thing. So some delays do take place. But otherwise, generally, 70 to 80% of the policies continue. 20% policies will change. I did a very interesting exercise, Mr. Venugopal. I prepared the budget speech of the Government of India. I compared it with the budget speech of Biden or something. They also present the budget speech. 60% was common. No difference.
I'm Surya Narayanan. I want to go beyond this session and want to point out what I consider to be a major omission in our seminar. The omission wasn't, you kindly hear me. The major omission is the role played by the overseas Chinese and the overseas Indian in the China's development, foreign direct investment, etc. In his first official visit to China after Singapore became an independent republic, as you all may know, Singapore was the last member state of ASEAN to establish diplomatic relations with China. He told Deng Xiaoping, we overseas Chinese are the poor people from southern part of China, from poverty-stricken areas. We came to Southeast Asia, but by dint of hard work and sheer perseverance, we control the economy of all Southeast Asian countries. Not merely that, he added, we are only 4% of the population of China, but we own 4 times the wealth of China. And as you all know, Deng Xiaoping, when he started the modernization program, nearly 80% of the investment came from the overseas Chinese. And they influenced his way of thinking, his way of export promotion driving. More than Lee Kuan Yew, it was Goh Keng Swee who was instrumental in establishing the export promotion zones, etc. The Maharashtra Chief Minister once met Lee Kuan Yew and told him that I would very much like Bombay to become another Shanghai. What should I do? Lee told him, can you de-link Bombay from Maharashtra and make it separate? He said that I'll be committing political harakiri if I do that. So we have our own problems and all those things. But the overseas Chinese played a very, very big role. Now, what do you call that? It is the liability of, it could also be the liability for China. Because the overseas Chinese live in a region where xenophobia had been the backbone of nationalist movement. Take the case of Indonesia. In 1911, the first major political party was started Sarikat Islam by Cokro Minoto, whose main platform was not to permit the Chinese to enter the rural areas to do batik trade. In Malaysia, in Vietnam, in various other places, the nationalist movement had an overseas Chinese thing. Now, if China champions the cause of overseas Chinese, what had been the result? I can go into detail, but I will not. 1952, they did it in the case of Chinese in Malaya. 1959 in Indonesia. 1965 in Indonesia again. 66, 67 in Burma and in Indonesia. In 78 in Vietnam. And wherever and whenever China has championed the cause of the overseas Chinese, it has harmed the overseas Chinese influence. Take another case. When the Beijing Olympics was held, the Olympic torch was being carried through several countries. When it went through European countries, there was demonstration against China for violation of human rights. So when it came to Southeast Asian countries, the overseas Chinese rallied behind China and they held demonstration in favor of China. And the Chinese Prime Minister said, I must express my eternal gratitude to my Chinese brothers and sisters in the Southeast Asian country. But if the economic links convert itself into political links, then I'm afraid the Chinese in Southeast Asia will suffer a lot and China will also suffer a lot. I want Watson to listen to what I said because we should not omit this serious dimensions of China's evolution as a political. Watson has been mentioning in the morning session and this session he went in the field of naval strategy. We have played a very, very, very vital role. But as one who has been looking at Southeast Asia and India's policy toward the region from mid-1960s when I was a student in Sapro House, I submit that it's a case of missed opportunities. I'll give you one or two illustrations and then stop with that. Few years ago, Narasimha Rao went to Thailand. A.N. Ram was our ambassador. There was a program of a lecture by Narasimha Rao in Thammasat University. While driving down to Thammasat University, A.N. Ram told Narasimha Rao, both are Telugus, so that binds them further. If you mean every Thai Buddhist wants to come to India, he wants to visit Lumbini where Buddha was born, Varanasi where he initiated the first preaching Gaya variation in Rwanda. And if you announce that anybody who wants to come on religious pilgrimage need not pay any visa fee, the whole of Thailand will be very happy. Narasimha Rao caught on it, and in the course of the speech in Thammasat University, he said, every Buddhist who wants to come to India on religious pilgrimage, we will waive the visa fee. The whole of Thailand went gaga over it the next day. Do you know how many years it took for them to implement it? 3 years. And that too, only Buddhist monks or visa fee was laid. Even today, whether it is in Sri Lanka, whether it is in Myanmar, whether it is in Thailand, Vietnam, every Buddhist, every Hindu would love to come to India. And my own study of the subject through various travel agencies tell me that every person who comes to India on religious tourism brings about $10,000 US. What they want is cheap, good accommodation. They don't want 5-star accommodation. What they want is no touts. They should be taken around safely. And it can easily be provided by the government of India. And I still wish that we do this, that anybody who wants to come to India for religion, whether it is Christian, Muslim or Hindu, we will not charge the visa, or even if we charge the visa fee $1 or something like that. That will give a tremendous boost to religious tourism. The second illustration of missed opportunities I want to mention is that in August 9, 1965, Singapore proclaimed its independence. Singapore did not have police force. Singapore did not have an army. Within 3 hours, Lee Kuan Yew called Thomas Abraham, who was then commissioner there, and told him, can India help us in training the military and the police force and all. Thomas Abraham wrote to Lal Bahadur Shastri, who was at that time Prime Minister, we did not clasp the hands. So they went to Israel. Thomas Abraham told me that if he had done that, the first army, navy, air force chief would have been Indians. When the Singapore Airlines started, they wanted technical cooperation with Air India. Air India fellows said, what, the Singaporeans, can they run aeroplanes? Today, as you know, Singapore Airlines is rated the best airlines in the world. So when the British followed the policy of East of Suez withdrawal, Lee Kuan Yew came and told Indira Gandhi, make use of the facilities here for shipbuilding and we again found up. So it's a saga of missed opportunities, and I think that we should, the mic is protesting, I'll stop. I think that we will open a new chapter in our relation with Southeast Asia, for which they also want and we also want.
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, sir. One second.
We move on to the online Q&A session. We are taking up this one question from a student, Shivam Kumar from Rashtra Raksha University. His question is, Russia is our biggest defense partner and Russia is becoming increasingly dependent on China, which is our biggest threat. Should we be worried about our partnership with Russia? And if so, has the time come where we look towards France as our strategic ally?
I'll just give it in one line. That's why you're looking towards both US and France.
I would like to thank the chair for the panel, Ms. Madhumita Raghuraman, and the distinguished panelists for their profound arguments and astute observations. I thank Ms. Raghuraman for having expertly moderated this session. I also thank the members of the audience for the interesting Q&A session. Before we conclude, I would like to request Major General Rajiv Narayanan to felicitate our young research officer and chair for the session, Ms. Madhumita Raghuraman. Thank you, sir.